But why did you go home alone? You put yourself in that dangerous situation where you were in an Uber alone with the Uber driver.
No,
I should feel safe going home in an Uber alone. Why not?
Right.
If a guy can do it and not get sexually assaulted, why can't I?
Hi, it's Hazel.
It's Azura.
And I'm Jermaine.
And welcome back to another episode of Clevities.
Now, before we start today's episode, I have a disclaimer that today the content that we are discussing might be triggering for some audiences. So if any topic surrounding sexual violence makes you uncomfortable, please take this chance to close this page and skip the episode. So today we're actually all dressed in a very intentional color. It's teal. It was very hard to find in our wardrobe.
Oh, yes.
But we felt it was important because teal is the color to support sexual assault survivors.
Now, a few episodes back, we actually talked about being ready for physical intimacy and how vital it is for the concept of consent to be present in the equation.
Yeah.
Today, we are going to speak about something just a little more heavy.
Okay.
And
That's
that
right.
is sexual assault.
Sexual assault, sexual violence, and more specifically, when you think about in any case like sexual violence, you would think, everyone would stand with the victim, right? Everyone would be on the victim's side. Unfortunately, that's not the case. And there's something called victim blaming that we're going to delve deep into today. You may have been a victim in such a case. You may have been a friend of a victim, and
Right.
hopefully through this episode you'll be able to understand a bit more. So what is victim blaming?
We've spoken about this on a few occasions. The most classic example, I'd say, is a girl is walking on the streets. Maybe she's dressed in like a skirt and a crop top, which is very common in Singapore, right? And if she, unfortunately, is the case of a rape case or like a sexual assault
Molestation,
case.
yeah.
Yes, for example, people actually put the blame on the girl, saying, "Hey, you shouldn't have worn like that.
Oh, you shouldn't have been
Asking
walking
for
out late at night by yourself
Correct.
wearing this.
And sometimes it's not even about just the blaming, but just the act of questioning itself is enough. Because I think sometimes people don't want to admit that they're blaming the victim, but I've heard like a couple of times, to be honest, like this kind of thoughts or questions fly around like it's nothing. They would say things like, "Oh, what was she wearing?" Like as if that should play a part,
As if that could have changed the outcome of the situation.
Exactly.
So victim blaming is when the victim of a crime or any wrongful act is held entirely or partially at fault for the harm that befell them. But here's the thing, sexual violence can happen to anyone, any
sure.
gender, any age, and the offender can even be someone of the same gender. It doesn't have to be male, female, or female, male, right?
Yeah.
It is a very serious crime. It's very traumatizing. But what is sexual violence? There's a few different kinds because we use a lot of terms: assault, abuse, harassment.
Yes.
But they're all different. Okay, so sexual assault is intentional physical conduct that the victim has not consented to. So this can be groping, fondling, kissing, or even touching a body part. Statutory rape. That is sexual assault.
A lot of people think that sexual assault is associated with rape, but there's actually so much more than there is to that. Even kissing
Yes,
without
of
consent
course.
is sexual assault.
Is
course.
assault. That's right. Sexual abuse is unwanted, sexually motivated acts intended to cause some sort of discomfort to the victims, especially when there's a power imbalance. For example, an adult and a child.
Employer, employee.
Yes, someone in a position of authority and someone below that.
Yeah.
Sexual harassment is unwelcome and inappropriate sexual advances, verbally or physically. So, like jokes, comments, like lewd comments, like "Wow, your tits like hanging out" and stuff like that. That would be sexual harassment, right? And basically, like sending nudes, sending inappropriate messages.
Yeah.
Someone just said that to me today.
Huh?
Like, I'm in this dress, as you can see, if
Okay.
you are watching us on YouTube.
Yeah.
And he actually said it like out of a joking manner, like, because we know each other, we are friends.
Oh, friends. Okay.
Yeah, we're friends. And then he went like, "Wow, 今天录半例啊," which is like half a tit showing. And
How do
I
you
just
feel
looked at
about
myself.
that?
I just looked at myself and I said, "I don't think there's anything here to see." And then they just like laughed at it like in a friendly way because he joked with me, so I joked with him back, right?
Okay.
But I feel like this sort of comments, they are very unwanted, especially in the workplace setting. And he is a colleague, not someone that I'm very close with, but we are acquaintances and we do see each other maybe once every 2 weeks.
So, in essence, right, you are a victim of sexual harassment because that was made to you, that comment was made to you unwantedly.
Correct.
And the way that you joked back, don't you feel like it was a defense mechanism?
It was. I said that to him because I wanted him to not make the same comment next time anymore.
You see, those kind of things are honestly more common than you think it is. Like, Hazy just got that today. I got that a couple of days ago.
Oh.
I was in a top similar to this,
Okay.
and then I had like a mesh over
Right. And
Okay.
definitely she has more to see than me lah.
So a low
Correct.
cut top with a mesh
Okay.
covering.
Yes,
Okay.
correct. Very low cut lah. And someone I know in passing,
Okay.
a lot older,
Okay.
said like, "Wow, you're very sexy," and I saw the eyes go whoop. Oh, and I
Was
was
it male or female?
Male.
Okay.
And we get these kind of comments passed around, thrown around very often, like it's nothing, you know. But like, how is that supposed to be comfortable? Like, is that even appropriate for you to be saying? And sorry, when this fella said this, his wife was like 10 meters away.
Oh, no.
So how do you respond?
I was like, ah.
You see, that's the same response, something similar to what Hazy did.
Right.
I actually experienced this yesterday. So I had a few like pictures, you know, on Instagram for my birthday, right? So it's to celebrate. It's kind of like my own empowerment.
Yes.
So this guy that I kind of work with, he's like in his 50s, pulled me aside and said to me, "Wow, like your pictures recently on Instagram have been very hot." And I laughed it off as well because I didn't know what to say. If I could choose, I would have said, "You know what? F you. Don't say that to me. That's fucking, you know, rude of you. And you shouldn't be commenting about me like that. I'm like 30 years younger than you."
And you know what? Like with her saying that, I actually know people personally and I can hear the kind of things that they would say, of which she'll be like, "Yeah, but you post like that, you wanted it to be hot, what? You post like that, you wear like that, you wanted people to look what?"
Yeah, true. Like I want people to look at me for the way I dress, but that's because it's how I express my confidence and my
Yeah.
fashion style. So what?
Exactly. And it's empowering for yourself, right?
Right.
But the truth of the matter is, regardless of all these, it's because of systemic injustice, right? That a lot of this sexual violence, sexual assault happens. And of course, it can happen to any gender, but historically and statistically, it happens to more women. So a 2018 online survey, it's worldwide by Stop Street Harassment.
Okay.
This is what has been reported. 81% of women, 43% of men have experienced sexual harassment at some point in their lives. So it's almost double for women.
Yeah.
So I would say most women would have experienced it, whether they're aware of it or not. Yes.
So there was one time, I think I mentioned this before as well. I was out in a station event and a fan said he wanted to take a picture with me.
Sure.
So we stood like side by side, you know, as we would, and we posed for the picture. And like when the shutter went like 3, 2, 1, he put his hand at my waist.
Yeah.
And I felt like a bit uncomfortable. So after we were done with the photo, he let his hand drop like slightly and it actually rubbed against my ass. And I felt like super offended. I
Yeah.
stepped away immediately. I looked at him, but I just entered the industry at that point in time. So I wasn't sure like if I was like imagining things.
Can you or not?
Yeah, like can I call him out? Is this normal? So I just like kept my distance from this guy ever since. And after that, subsequently, some other people told me that, this guy is known to be like that. So that was when my doubts were confirmed.
But in that situation, like it's hard for you to speak up, you know? Like you
Right.
may have froze in that situation, or you may have felt like, I don't want to make it a big deal because you are there on a professional capacity,
Right.
perhaps.
Right, you're right. And I didn't want to like make a mountain out of a molehill,
Yeah.
that kind of thing, you know. Not saying that this is not serious, but I chose to keep quiet, step aside, and continue with my work.
But to be honest, right, why do you guys think that females are more prone to sexual violence or sexual assault?
I think it's because we are not as physically strong as men. So
Really?
perhaps certain men think they can get away with it because they're just stronger in that sense. And if we retaliate, they always have more power to, hold us.
I think it's a societal thing, or something that's been there for a very long time, of which females are this and males are this. Oh, males are supposed to make the first move. Oh, males are the ones who are usually more attracted to females first. Oh, they're the ones who will look at you, that kind of thing.
Or like females are supposed to fulfill the male sexual
Yeah.
needs or something like that.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think it stems from there. And even though it's 2022 and we're in a modern society where people are trying every day to fight for, rights and things like that we're equals. But at the end of the day, I think we also are very aware that, men and women are built differently and that we have our individual roles. And I think there are some people who still play on that and take advantage of that.
Like a very patriarchal kind of view, right?
Exactly. Like
Yeah.
growing up, my dad always tell me, Meme, can you please dress more decently? And he says this because he doesn't want me to get into trouble, right?
Right.
But that's the kind of like thoughts that I feel like people of our generation are being taught.
Yeah.
So for guys who hear whatever my father says, maybe they will think that, hey, if women dress like that, it means that they can be a part of something else.
Right,
And
like
then when that happens, it's on them.
Like they think by hearing that, they internalize that, oh, it's the female's responsibility
Correct.
to cover up.
Correct.
Yeah.
You have a brother.
Yes, I
Does
do.
he ever say that to your brother? I mean, we've seen guys in like short ass shorts, what, out of the house.
Okay,
I don't
thankfully-
think anyone says like, cover up.
My dad did tell him to not get an ear piercing. Because my dad is like traditional like that, right? He doesn't want like negative connotations to be associated with his children. So
Okay.
I think he's fair in this sense.
I'll give you an example when you
Okay.
want to talk about guys. I mean, my show partner Avery, right?
Right.
He's a very naturally, I mean, he's very bulky guy. He works out a lot and he's
Yes.
got like some big muscles on his biceps and triceps. And I don't know what other
Nice.
steps you have there,
Yes.
but yeah. So when he goes out, sometimes he wears like a tank top. Or he wears like short sleeve or something like that, which really shows off his muscles. And people take that as an invitation to, oh yes, I can touch it, I can squeeze it, I can, violate him because he showed it off. What?
Right.
But that's uncomfortable for him too.
Right.
Yeah.
That's harassment.
That's unwanted touching or groping or
Right.
comments. Like people
Sometimes
make
I
comments.
lift out his shirt lah, but it's consensual, I tell you first.
Here's the thing: victim blaming. It's very common. It's a part of. Like a lot of cultures, I think.
unfortunately.
Yes. But there are a lot of factors that contribute to sexual violence. One of them is alcohol and or drug use. If let's say the perpetrator is like high out of their mind, they would, somehow convince themselves that it's okay.
It's mutual.
Yeah, perhaps. And also adherence to traditional gender norms and hostility towards women. So yes, we're in Singapore, modern society, but in a lot of countries and a lot of cultures, females are still deemed as of a lower social status than males.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that could play into it as well. Exposure to sexually explicit media. Maybe you watch a lot of like porn
Yeah.
that shows them being very aggressive.
Yeah.
Correct. The male is in a position of power.
Dominance,
Where the female is not.
Yes.
And you think you can apply that in real life.
Yeah, I mean, you see Tom Cruise jumping out of a plane without a parachute. You're gonna do that? No, right? Porn is a movie. It's not. Depiction of real life.
Fair
Yeah.
point.
Right. Or prior sexual victimization. I actually know of an old friend who, when we were in school, he actually sexually assaulted a couple of our other guy friends. I think I've mentioned this to you guys before. And then we found out, not that it's an excuse for anything, but it explains the pattern. We found out that when he was a child, he was sexually assaulted by his uncle. So then that, I think, really festered in him the years that passed, right? And that caused a pattern of sexual assault later in his life. From a victim, he became a perpetrator.
Yeah.
So you can be both.
Exactly, and I think this kind of thing, it works only two ways. If you grew up in such an environment, you will grow up to be like the uncle you had,
Yes.
or you would tell yourself to never be the uncle you had.
The third possibility is that you could grow up to become even more of a victim. Because you think, you normalize it. You're like, yes,
Right.
this is what love is. Being treated like that.
This point. So I know someone, she's female. So she grew up in a place where the males are dominant, where the males are always right? She grew up under the care of her grandfather.
Okay.
She has an older brother.
Okay.
Older brother was doted on, could do no wrong. She was being treated like shit, basically.
Oh, no.
Like second class lah. And she grew up and we realized that we saw it come out in a lot of things, especially her relationship with men, of which being treated like less and like shit was normal to her. That she gravitated towards that almost because that's what she knew.
She was familiar with that, right?
She maybe sometimes even wanted to find relationships where she feels like she's less worthy.
Correct.
But this is all subconscious, right?
Yes.
And it's very harmful actually.
Yeah, and it's hard to unlearn something like that because you were born into it, essentially.
Correct. I think it's all part of trauma of which you can't fix until you realize.
Is she still in that cycle? Do you know?
She's in a healthy relationship right now, so I'm happy about that.
Actually, it really takes luck and fate to find a good guy who would slowly guide you out of that dark hole. So it's really very hard to like step out of something that you have learned your whole life.
So just stay alone.
Huh?
Yeah, just stay by yourself. Oh, yeah.
Well, some people can accept that. Some people still think that they need love. But the kind of love that they accept is what they think they need. And sometimes if they didn't know better, this relationship is actually very toxic.
That's true. Another, contributing factor to sexual violence, high level of sexual violence crimes accompanied by weak laws and policies as sanctions. So because there's no consequences, then more of these cases, come up.
Right.
Yeah, and they fester inside the community. Like, okay, in Singapore, I don't know if you guys know this, the maximum penalty for such a criminal offense, sexual assault and all that, is a 20-year-long imprisonment with an imposed fine and or caning. So maximum is 20 years.
Wow.
It's not like lifetime imprisonment or death penalty or something like that.
Right.
Do you guys feel that Singapore's laws pertaining to this issue, like, do you feel protected by that? Will it ever be enough?
I do feel like we're fortunate in Singapore, of which, you know, if you take a case to court, that you would be heard, that they would listen to your side of the story, and that they wouldn't, you know, question things like, oh, why you wear that? Or, oh, why were you there? That kind of thing, you know, because we have Singapore laws that protects women. Yeah, so I feel like that's a great thing, because there are some countries that doesn't have that. But 20 years...
I think in certain situations, maybe 20 years, that's considered too little.
If, for example, the rape resulted in a death,
Right.
I wouldn't think 20 years is enough.
But then that wouldn't be considered a sexual assault, right?
Oh, so that would be trialed differently. So
Right, I
maybe
think
there would
so.
be other penalties on top of that.
Correct,
right?
correct,
But I want to bring up what Azura said about how, you know, in Singapore, like, you feel hurt by the justice system. And yeah, this is true. In Kuala Lumpur, this Singaporean girl was molested by a male masseuse, right?
Okay.
And when she tried to file a report with the Malaysian police, they actually made her repeat the statement multiple times and made jokes about it and laughed about it.
What?
I
In
know
the
about
police
this.
station,
This was
yes.
quite recent, right? And I think her mother stepped out on social media and
Yes.
asked what she could do about it, if anybody had any experiences, because the police there were not doing anything about it.
And you know what? This is a sad thing. They were blaming the girl who got molested, and they were blaming the mom as well. They were saying, well, if you're gonna send her to a male masseuse, then you're like basically expecting this to happen.
Huh?
Yeah, why would you, you know, send her to a male masseuse and allow her naked body to be touched by a guy?
So the molesting didn't happen because the masseuse was giving her massage.
No, he was.
No, I think there was obvious gropings and things
he
like
was
that.
touching and sucking her nipples.
Oh, yeah,
Say
yeah, yeah.
what?
You don't do that during a massage. I've never heard of a
For sure
nipple
you don't.
massage. Yeah, so that's not a thing that happens. So she was most definitely, you know, assaulted.
But you see, here's the other thing, right? We also grew up being told these things to the point that sometimes you consciously make a decision like, oh, I shouldn't go to a male masseuse. You know? Right?
That's true. Like, I would actually personally, I would not be comfortable going to a male gynecologist.
Me neither.
Yeah, because I feel unsafe. But then again, a male or a female, you could experience sexual assault from either one of them. But it's because of what you were told growing up.
Yeah.
That's why you avoid these situations. So victim blaming, right? I mean, it comes in a lot of forms. We've said like, oh, her clothes were asking for it. You shouldn't have been walking out late at night. You shouldn't have been going to male masseuse. A lot of these things. But have we even stopped to consider the impact on victims that have survived these situations?
They may feel like internal shame for the rest of their lives, you know. And the
Yes.
next time a similar thing happens to them, they may not even be courageous enough to speak up for themselves.
Exactly.
So I tell you what, this is a vicious cycle, because I think I've shared before, right? In a previous episode, you can go look it up. I think we spoke about workplace harassment. Something similar happened to me, and it took me more than 24 hours to go to the police station. And before I went, I had a lot of questions that I asked myself, of which included, would they ask me, why did I run out?
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
Wait, did they actually ask you that? Like, why
No,
didn't
they
you?
asked me, what took you so long to come?
Because of this, because of the fear of being blamed as a victim, the fear that the justice system wouldn't protect you or hold up to you. Actually, there's this girl in Singapore. She was sexually assaulted by a family friend when she was about 9 or 10 years old. And she was so badly traumatized, right? Even later in her life, in secondary school, when she learned about sexual reproduction, she couldn't be in the classroom. And when she had to take her science exam, she had to have a modified examination paper to take out that whole part about human reproduction and sexual, you know, about sexual abuse, because she just could not even face the topic. And you can see how, you know, the effects of sexual assault and sexual abuse can be with you for years on later. And she actually has PTSD from that. Yeah, post-traumatic stress disorder.
And it doesn't even end there, you know, because I think when you carry stuff like PTSD with you, there will be people who will say, Aya, why let it affect you? Aya, so long ago what? You know, it just never ends.
And the fact is, more than 80% of sexual perpetrators is someone that the victim knows. Could be a family member, a friend,
Someone
a
you
relative.
used to trust.
Exactly. So that causes a lot of trust issues.
Yeah.
Yeah. Experiencing anxiety, flashbacks, depression, phobias, that's all part of, post-traumatic stress.
Right, and physical concerns, right? What if you accidentally get knocked up by this
That's
rape
true.
situation? First of all, coming from the lady's point of view, if you want to abort the baby, you will feel even more guilt, right? On top of the self-blame, the anger that you put on yourself already.
I mean, you feel like dirty and disgusting. Like,
Correct.
You have something in you that you never wanted in there, was against your will.
Yes, exactly. But then again, you want to abort, you feel guilty. But if you don't abort, how can you live with this baby for the rest of your life?
Exactly.
Especially this baby doesn't come with a father figure in his or her life, right? How do you just make ends meet?
Exactly. You might not be ready, mentally, physically, financially.
Exactly.
And it's always going to remind you of what happened.
Victim blaming is not something that we can say, let's just stop it, and it stops. There's so many parts of, I think, the systemic,
Right.
the
Yes.
systemic reasons that cause it. But the fact is, blaming silences the victim. Victim blaming itself makes you less likely to want to speak up, less likely to want to seek recovery and seek help. Like for you, it took you so long to go to the police station because you were scared, because this exists.
Because, I didn't do this. Oh, maybe I contributed to this. Oh, I should have done this. This was the obvious choice to do, but I
Yeah.
didn't. So does that make me like less of a victim? You know what I mean?
Correct. And then you keep second guessing yourself and you are so worried like what the officers will ask you and they would think that this is all a joke. It's all a scam, right?
Exactly. I think one way of kind of stopping victim blaming is to understand that this could happen to anyone. Because sometimes when you read the news, right, and you're like, that could never happen to me. It must have been the victim's fault. Like she was stupid or he was stupid to be in that situation. But you could have been that person.
Right.
Yeah.
And who
Yeah.
are you to say that if you were in the exact same situation, you would not make the exact same choice?
Right.
On the other hand, I have a story to share. This happened to a friend of mine.
Okay.
So, male.
Okay.
Was working in an environment with many people that he knows and don't know.
Yeah.
So basically, what had happened was that he had been accused of touching someone.
Okay.
Oh.
And he was so confused because he could not even remember like what happened, because as far as he knew, there was no intentional actions of such.
Okay.
So the only thing that he could basically figure out eventually, after rounds of questioning and everything, he had almost fallen over, and this girl was next to him, and he almost like touched her or something like that, but he stopped and he was like, "Oh, almost touched you," or "Don't want to go there," or something like that. But basically, there was no physical contact on any inappropriate parts, and I think she had taken it as sexual harassment
Oh.
and went ahead to lodge for it. But in such a situation, what is it? Because there was no intention. It was almost not real. But if you say that, it could have been real to her. And
That's a very
victim
gray. Yeah, that's a very gray area. That's very complicated.
Yeah.
Like even for the justice system to try and
Yeah.
Correct.
But eventually it was dropped because there just wasn't enough.
Okay. I
Right.
mean, I think that's a very different kind of situation, right? Where there was no intent, but maybe she felt like she was harassed.
And I also saw this story on another page where this fella in a workplace setting, so she was molested by someone.
Okay.
She filed a report, but the HR did not do anything because, first of all, that someone was of a higher rank than she is.
Okay.
And secondly, he was going to leave the office already anyway.
What do you mean by anyway?
So,
That's right.
as
So-
in to HR is like, oh, not my pasa because he's not gonna be around.
Right.
Correct. And like, honestly, what can they do about it? They don't know. So they chose to let it go.
Would she have reported it to the police? Did she
Right,
consider?
maybe. I think that would be a better solution.
Yeah.
But of course, for some people, they think like settling it within their office, not ruining the reputation of the company is the right way to do it. They're considerate of their company, but in the end, they didn't get the same amount of respect.
I read this thing, right, where it says, because historically a lot more females are subject to sexual harassment. So rather than reducing empathy for the males, meaning you feel less for the males and you feel more for the females to stop victim blaming,
Okay.
they're saying that empathy should just be increased. You shouldn't reduce empathy anywhere. So I think empathizing is a big part to play in stopping victim blaming. For example, like when you hear of a story of, let's say, someone's house got burgled, immediately you would think, they never locked their door. So it was their fault because they never locked their door, so that's why they got burgled, right? But how about, if you empathize and you understand that it's not about like people get what they deserve, right? It's not about that. So there's something called binding values versus individualizing values. So binding values is governing behavior in groups. Individualizing values is promoting personal rights and freedom. For example, calling a victim contaminated versus injured. So contaminated is they're dirty.
It's more negative
It's
lah.
negative, yeah. Injured is, yes, they are a victim. So the language matters too, like when you
Right,
report
right,
in the
right.
news and all that.
And I think when we talk about, victim blaming as well, it gets a little bit more serious, or, people have a more lewd view of it when alcohol and drugs are involved, like we mentioned earlier, but, we skimmed over that, right? So when things like that happen, how do you justify it? Because wrong is wrong. In whatever state that she was in, it was not consented. But people will say things, and people will say, oh, she was intoxicated.
Correct. And sometimes the perpetrator may even say, what do you mean she didn't say yes? She said yes.
Sometimes in that situation you black out. It's a trauma response, right, in your body, and you black out, and sometimes you don't even have the memory of it. Yeah, which is very dangerous. Have you guys ever met or you know of anyone who have been in a situation where they're just persistent on like blaming the victim?
I feel like this is a pattern that is very obvious, especially in the older generation.
Yeah.
I don't know if you girls feel that way, but like, growing up, I've met so many people, uncle and aunties outside. Anytime anything happens, they'll be like, Aiya, or you lah, because you did this, then this happened. Or they'll be like, Aiya, earlier had I known, I wouldn't have done this.
True.
So the blaming culture is very obvious. It seems to almost be like the way, the mechanism that they will respond to a lot of situations. It's never their fault, it's always somebody else's.
I would assume usually that males are the one that would, do more of the victim blaming. But something that happened to me, I was quite surprised by. I think I told this in a previous episode as well, about getting sexually assaulted by my Uber driver when I was in the United States, right? So I was going home alone from a party. My friends had all left already. So I was in an Uber alone. And then he was just, chatting me up. And I was just chatting because I thought like everyone there is friendly.
Right.
So we
And
just
you sat beside him or behind him?
I sat behind him.
Okay.
Yeah, I never ever sit beside the driver because
Right.
I don't feel safe.
not
Yeah.
both, yeah.
So we were just chatting and just being friendly, and obviously I was intoxicated. I was just trying to get home and go to sleep. So the moment I step out of the car, like he grabbed my wrist, pushed me up against his car, and he didn't let me go. And this was at the lobby of my apartment building, and he actually planted a kiss on me lah. So I somehow managed to wrangle my wrists out, and I ran back to my apartment. And I was surprised because when I was recalling the incident to friends the days after, one of my female friends that I was not very close to, she actually made a remark and she said, "But why did you go home alone? Why didn't you go home with everyone else? Like you put yourself in that dangerous situation where you were in an Uber alone with the Uber driver." And I was really disappointed by that. I felt like that was kind of victim blaming, right? That was-
Right. Like, how is it your fault?
Yeah, I should feel safe going home in an Uber alone. Why not? If a guy can do it and not get sexually assaulted, why can't I?
Is it fair to have to, take all the steps and measures and just do more than everyone else because things could happen to you?
Absolutely. There's this very infamous case from 2012 from Delhi.
Yeah.
And this was a rape case that made international news. And we're not going to recount all of the details because it's very, very grotesque.
Yes,
I believe there's a Netflix
Series,
docudrama
yeah,
as well.
correct.
Yeah.
So this 23-year-old woman took a night bus home with a male friend. She was gang raped and brutally murdered by 6 other men, and her friend was actually beaten up to death by the rapist as well. She had to be sent to Singapore, a transplant facility, because her organs were severely damaged, but they could not save her. She didn't make it in the end. The part of this story that we want to emphasize on is the fact that the rapists actually blame her for the rape and the death. They said a decent girl shouldn't be roaming around at 9 p.m. at night. She should be staying at home. And she should have just been silent and let the rape happen. Maybe she wouldn't have died.
What? I think this is what you spoke about just now, right? Binding values.
Yeah.
How the culture thinks of this as a whole. It really matters. So
But look at her, she's one person.
I know. Perhaps in a place, in that certain culture, this was just not the norm. And that is unfortunate for this 23-year-old.
Yeah.
It really takes a lot to change this culture.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it isn't something that one person can change.
But I think it's a generational shift.
Yeah.
Like if this generation acknowledges and we are educated on that, then we can teach the right things to the
Correct.
next generation.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's not like an overnight thing, right? It can't happen like that. But it takes time, but it will happen.
I think we're also in a time where we're sort of in between generations, you know?
True.
Like for her, for this girl, you know, she's in a culture that still heavily subscribes to, you know, males can get away with this kind of things, that this is just what they do, that you, to protect yourself, you should not be out and things like that. But, you know, there's a generational shift in which she could have been a little bit more exposed to Western culture. She might have been seeing, or, you know, she believes that a change should happen and that she should start of herself. So in wanting to do that and in wanting equality, in that I can also go out, things like this happen because it's not matched.
Yeah.
Right. So I have another story. This is with regards to a father and a daughter. So this father entered his daughter's bedroom while everyone was asleep to sexually assault and then rape her. And this carried on for almost a year on multiple accounts. And this daughter, she actually pretended to be asleep every time. Her sister was sleeping beside her. Why she did not come out to report the father was because the family was financially dependent on him for her mother's cancer treatment funds.
Oh my gosh.
That is terrible. While your wife is sick with cancer, you are doing this
Yeah.
to your daughter. Can you imagine that?
Man?
Yeah. So this daughter, basically, she doesn't want to add any more concern to her already sick mother. That's why she didn't come out. But eventually, justice is served. 24 years imprisonment for raping his biological daughter, who is only 14 years old, by the way.
This story is very, very familiar. I think my friend was the defense lawyer in this case.
Oh.
And I had heard about this when it was going on. There was this one day we hung out and this friend was like, I need to leave early today. I've got court tomorrow. And we're like, nothing new. You always got court. Why you need to leave? And he was like, no, it's not quite important. So the next day, we met again. And it's a standard practice for me to like, oh, how's trial? How's court? You know. And that day he looked out of it completely. And I was like, what's going on? And usually, you know, they don't talk about it or they can't talk about it, right? And he told me that he had to defend a father who had
Oh my
raped his
gosh.
daughter. He had to put the daughter on the stand
Oh my
because at this point, if I'm correct, at this point, while the trial happened, she was about 19, 20 already. So he had to put her on the stand and he knew that he should not even be doing this, but he had to put her on the stand and tear her apart. And he said, I could not look her in the eye. And the only thing I could think about was if my mother knew what I was doing at work.
As a defense lawyer, sometimes, you know, you have to defend, like, these are your clients. And that's,
That's
that
just
haunts
very
you for life, you
unfortunate,
know?
yeah.
That haunts you for life. Well, do you guys think that sexual violence is something that could truly be prevented, you know, in a society like this? Who does the responsibility fall on? Does it fall on the people who are vulnerable, like, for example, females, to cover up or wear more clothes? Or does it fall on the perpetrators, educating the people that are predisposed to sexually assaulting other people?
Because I feel like this is the efforts of a community as a whole, an entire society or nation even. So the pessimistic me would say, unfortunately, I don't think that it can be truly prevented. If not, we would not be receiving so many cases every day. Every time I go on the EDT, I read the news, something is related to sexual assault, molestation, rape.
So let me throw this question back to you guys. Like, let's say if you have a daughter next time.
Okay?
Are you going to tell her to be careful? Or, like, you know, when she's going out alone late at night, to maybe wear something that's a little bit more covered up? Because that's your daughter.
Correct.
That's your child. You don't want her to end up like any of these people.
Right. Oh,
Because we can say, like, it shouldn't be their responsibility. But if it's your own blood and flesh, you're going to want to preserve her life as much as possible.
I mean, can I just say that we've covered this before, but can I just say that when that happened to me, I was in jeans and a long sleeve turtleneck top.
Yeah.
So what am I going to tell my daughter? You know, she could be in something similar. It could still happen.
so for me, if it were my own daughter, of course I'll tell her, if you go to parties, you know, just take note of your drinks. Don't let anyone spike them. If you have to head to the toilet, bring your drink with you. Who cares? If not, just take a new glass altogether. And when it comes to the part like where it concerns how she likes to dress, of course I want to give her the space and freedom to dress however she likes. But at the same time, I have to remind her to watch out what kind of setting is she in.
Yeah. You know, you can think like, why do we have to have preventative measures? Why is it your future daughter has to watch out for her drinks, has to watch out for what she wears, right? I mean, you could be very naive. You could say, yeah, you know, just go and live your life. It's on the onus of the perpetrators, not on you. But then you're losing out because we are living in an unfair society. This society is not equal. This society is not fair.
Yeah.
And to preserve your own life, you have to take preventative measures. And that's the very sad reality of the situation.
Exactly.
As unfair as it is.
Yes.
I think most importantly, everyone has a part to play. You have to stop yourself from saying or doing things that are wrong. And on the other hand, you also have to take steps to protect yourself.
Just be intelligent about it. Yeah. When you talk about preventing sexual violence, there's so many risk factors you have to mediate. I think it comes on many different levels. There's individual level, relationship level, community, and society. It's a very tall order, and it's going to take a lot. But that's why we're having this conversation.
Right.
That's why we need to talk about this. It's uncomfortable, it's heavy, but we have to.
And it's tough, you know, because even with every generation, you think that, you know, something's going to change, that someone's going to do something differently. But then again, a generation is so vastly different. You still have people of different education levels, of different life experiences. It's very difficult to move everyone at the same pace.
The
totally
least, right,
understand.
that we can do is to stop victim blaming at least. Because sexual violence in itself is already such a traumatic incident. Some people are calling victim blaming the second wave of trauma. After you're already traumatized, then you get traumatized again by people telling you it was your fault. That disrupts, you know, your recovery journey. That makes you very confused
Correct.
about your experience. Like, was I really sexually assaulted, or was it maybe my own fault? Like, I said something to cause, you know, this situation, and that can, you know, cause a lot more trauma for the victim in the future.
I agree. So for our listeners here at Hush Podcast, you know, if you have friends or if you yourself are a victim, please seek help and know that you're not alone, you know. You always have support behind you. And of course, if you have friends who are like victims of such cases, unfortunately, how can you better help them? I think number one, you can lend them a listening ear. Just sit down, listen to them and believe them. That's the most important thing.
That's
And
right.
I think if they're having doubts, you know, if they don't know whether, you know, they can report it, if they question themselves, you know, whether they had placed themselves in a situation like that, I think what you can do and what people around me did for me was to say that, you know, they assured me that I was not wrong. They assured me that I was violated and that the state would protect me. And that gave me the confidence eventually to report it. And I think that's what you can do for, you know, victims if you hear of it.
Yeah, don't question them. Don't say like, well, why didn't you run away or why didn't you react? I mean, they always say that when you see a wild boar, you're not supposed to run. Because if you run, they'll chase you down and they will attack you. You're supposed to just freeze. Well, in that situation, your brain is in danger. It's telling you to freeze until the situation is over.
Yes.
And that's something that happens to so many victims. So believe them, give them that space to, you know, don't question what they did.
Allow them some space to make their own decisions. You never know what is going through their head. Check in with them, ask them how are you from time to time. Make them feel that they are loved and supported.
And on the flip side, if you do hang out with friends, you know, males or females, and you do hear them pass remarks like, oh, wow, she wearing, oh, but she wear like that, what? Oh, but when she posts things like that, she want people to see what? I think it's on you to call them out and to challenge his beliefs to them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think compassion and empathy are both very, very important.
Yes.
When it comes to such a situation. And hopefully, if you have been a victim of sexual violence or sexual assault and you have feared speaking up, we hope that, you know, our discussion this episode will be able to give you more insight into, you know, whether you feel safe to report it, even if it's happened a while ago. But sometimes reporting it can give you the closure that you need to
Correct.
heal and to move on.
Yes, or even, you know, stepping up to talk about your incident only if you're comfortable with it. You never know how much courage it can bring to other people suffering from the same situation or incident. Okay, with that, thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Clarity's Hush Podcast. We know that this is a heavy episode, so you know, we hope that we have your support and always show love to all those around you. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at itsclarity.co.
That's right. You can listen to us on Me Listen, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Don't forget to turn on your notifications.
And we're also on YouTube as well.
So that's it for today. We'll see you next time.
Bye. So because there's no, what is that word?
Law.
Governing body.
Because there's no,
Consequences.
yeah. So because there's no consequences, then more of these cases, come up.